Welcome to Artist Tales, the podcast that features and celebrates artists from different walks of life. I'm your host, Heather Martin, and in this episode, we're challenging perception and expanding our sense of what's possible of digital media with artist and photographer Geoff Titley. Geoff's work invites us to rethink nature, not as it is, but as it could become. Through digital photography, moving image, and 3D printing, he explores an assumptive view of nature, a concept where landscapes and life forms blur between the organic and the artificial. His layered screen-based compositions ask viewers to look again through the lens of technology and transformation. Welcome, Geoff.
Thank you, Heather. I'm very pleased to be here, and thank you for inviting me to Artist Tales.
Well, thanks for being a guest. I'm really, quite happy to have you as a guest. To start off this episode, could you tell us a bit more about yourself and how you got into digital photography and moving image and 3D printing?
Certainly, Heather. I'm originally from Australia, and I was born in a town called Charters Towers in North Queensland. And I came to London to sort of, as part of my one of my various career paths, and this was to do with music. I was performing and playing music back then, and London was the place to be. But since then, I've had other career paths, and one of them was to do with digital data analysis and delivery of large platforms for IT platforms for delivery and analysis of data. And a few years ago now, I embarked on this career path of digital art. And this began, I guess, although it was a continuation to some extent, so I could say it was boosted by a commitment to study for an MA photography. So it took a couple of years to get into the zone of photography through doing this MA. And it was a fantastic opportunity. And it was an interesting time. This was around 2011. And there was a very exciting festival that year with a lot of digital art that was very inspiring for me. And also during the course, I remember watching an interview with Fred Ritchen or a presentation by Fred Ritchen, a professor of photography from New York. And this was at the Foam convention, at the Foam Gallery of Photography in Amsterdam. And he said that, that what we see with digital photography is that we'll probably find that it has nothing to do with photography at all. And I found that really fascinating comment, because he comes from a very documentary photography area. But I immediately seized on it as a kind of, and I'm sure he meant it generally, but he's particularly interested in documentary photography, and I fully understood his approach when talking about it. But I was fascinated by the opportunity that it gave me, I suppose, to just explore this whole idea of digital photography and its relationship to photography. So that was a few years ago, and the course gave me the opportunity to really spend time finding out what I wanted to do with photography in particular. And I was particularly interested in the idea of the medium itself, the kind of digital side of things being incorporated into the subject as well as being part of the process. So I spent quite a few years producing work where the photographic work, which was I suppose in collaboration with the machine and output with hints of the original image, the original kind of actual scene or construction that I'd photographed and had that incorporated into the output, so that was still there, but it was also heavily, obviously, very much a part of a digital process in the final production.
And what strikes me is, when you've talked about constructing, so is your approach more constructing kind of artwork rather than kind of creating or, perhaps using other words to describe that process?
I think now I would say I'm more into the construction of work. But previously, with the photographic images I was using, I always considered them to not just have the width and the height of an image, but also to have a depth, and that was a hidden depth. It's a depth that we don't see in the image. The depth I'm talking about is one we don't see in the image. The depth is the code, all of the information that you are able to access when you have the image on screen and you're using digital applications and programs to process the image. So I always saw that as a 3D, in my mind, it was something 3D. There was a depth to it. And so I worked in that area. So there was the original image and I was just delving into it. Now I do not as much 2D image work, and I work more with 3D images. And I think that's probably, I often start with an image or a scan. So I've got a representation of something that I consider real, and then the machine and I collaborate to once again process that and output it back into a space that humans inhabit. And here we have this collaboration between me and the machine. But that's often, I consider that more of a construction, if you like, than the original work that I have been doing with 2D images.
And just for the listener, I mean, I think a lot of people, including myself, I'm used to a 2D image. So what's the difference between a 2D image and a 3D image?
Well, when I say 3D image, I guess I'm talking about on-screen working. I'm working with a 3D image, but in fact, I output it as a 3D object. So the image, it could be a scanned image rather than using a camera. I'll use a scanner or a scanning application to get a complete view of the object that I'm wanting to represent. And that's I'm using that in the development of the work, which might incorporate other objects or other aspects that I want to introduce to the work on screen. And through that, I'll produce an object, and then I'm able to print it with a 3D printer.
That sounds so interesting. And I guess it adds, as you mentioned before, kind of the layering and the depth to the image or the piece of work that you're constructing. Now, I did mention in the introduction that, you're kind of exploring the assumptive view of nature. Could you talk a bit more about that? And because that sounds like the kind of the subject matter you're dealing with. So you're kind of dealing with very natural world. What draws you to that, and why do you kind of want to challenge our view of it?
I'm particularly interested in I think the situation that we find ourselves in, and you could probably say that of many generations, but I think right now there are certain crises that we are facing as humans, and I think part of that is to do with our view of other nature, if you like. Other nature is there for our use, and the assumptive view is something like what could we do with that? It's a tree, but what can we do with it? How can we make that tree work for us? So I was quite interested in the writings of Martin Heidegger on the subject. I think he called it On Technology, and he wrote about technology and nature. And technology in that instance is not simply the electronic technology that we're familiar with, but any tool really is his definition of technology. And so as humans, we just often look at what's around us in other nature and see opportunities there, and something that can become, and it's considered to be quite a destructive view of other nature. We're not working with nature necessarily. I think the example they often use is a dam on a river, because the river is there for us to dam and change things, and regardless of how that affects not just the water flowing, but also everything that depends on that water, or every living part of nature that depends on that water or that environment, is all being affected by our approach. And I think that's a kind of crucial element to our view of nature, because another view of that would be we could build a water mill and it would just be in perhaps collaboration with the water. It wouldn't be a destructive approach as much as a dam is, say. So I think that's the sort of examples that I've come across when exploring the idea of the assumptive view of other nature.
I've seen some of your work, and what strikes me is the kind of life cycle of life and kind of decay, and you're capturing the decay side of things. How much of that also do you try to capture? Is that kind of part of what you've just talked about, of us trying to kind of shoehorn nature into helping us?
Well, I'm glad you picked up on that, Heather, because I have done several series of work about decay and decomposition. It's a natural part of the life cycle, and also it's from an artist's point of view, visually, I think it's quite an interesting area to explore too. And I have been, that work that I did entitled Decay several years ago was actually shortlisted. A series from that work was shortlisted in the Aesthetic Art Prize in New York a few years ago now. But I'm pleased you brought it up because I actually have a new project, and this one's called Endless, and it's along those lines. It's a project where it's an ongoing project where I find discarded objects or something that's no longer needed or no longer used. It's dropped. It's kind of squashed. That's it. The end of it. And I've digitally captured it, and I've included it into my depiction of the cycle. And the project's called Endless, and it's my depiction of the endless cycle. So we might, see nature, see what's there, take it, make it into something, discard it, but it's still something, isn't it? It's still part of our environment, of what we are, in a sense, as nature on this planet. And so I've kind of used that idea in recreating some new work that's based, that's using the material that I've digitally captured of disposed and objects, etc., that have been thrown away, discarded.
That sounds really fascinating, and I'm really looking forward to seeing some of the art that comes out of that, to be honest. Now, you've touched on a couple of people who you've mentioned who have influenced you. Are there any other people or anything else that kind of influences your art?
Well, I think, the writings of Heidegger and other people who have sort of interpreted his work are very important. Also, when I was studying, I was interested in a sociologist by the name of Sherry Turkle, who was very much in researching and writing about the digital transformation, if you like. I mean, a lot of what is affecting society because of the opportunities that the internet has given us. But at that time, or prior to that time, there was a big change when the websites were no longer just static. They were actually quite dynamic, and people every day were able to upload information and contribute. So I think that was a big change, and Sherry Turkle had written a lot about that. So I was quite interested in her work. So they influenced me in my thinking about the subject matter of my work. One, I suppose, influence in a not so much perhaps in a visual way initially, but more just in an approach, was Andy Warhol. And when I was much younger, I was fascinated by the factory. And I think that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be part of the factory and, go to New York and be part of Warhol's factory. That was a great a dream, I suppose. And I guess in those days I was doing screen printing, and in particular photographic screen printing. And I suppose the influence of Warhol was evident then in my visual art. And so much so that colleagues of mine in Brisbane at the time, musicians who were in a band called the Go-Betweens, asked me and a friend of mine, Mark Ross, to produce a poster advertising their first single. And the first single was entitled Lee Remick. And that was just an obvious thing for me, Lee Remick, here we go. Warhol's photographic silkscreen printing. So I did a version of, a la Warhol of the film actor Lee Remick for the promotion of their single, and that was quite, that kind of set me off, I suppose, in my sort of, gave me a lot of confidence because it was well received, and it's actually part of a box set that's being re-released this year, I think, for that band. And strangely enough, one of the members of the Go-Betweens, Lindy Morrison, the drummer, is in another group now with a colleague, Rob Snarsky, and the band's called the Snarsky Circus Lindy Band. And their album has just been released, and they asked me if I could provide art for the cover of their album, which I've done. But it's quite a long way from the original Lee Remick poster, if you like. This particular artwork for the cover is a photograph of a 3D print that I created from a photograph of an actual piece of vegetation, and so it's a kind of, it's more in keeping with the digital approach that I take these days, and rather than the original silkscreen photographic prints, which I still, if I could take the time, I would actually love to get back in and do some more photographic silkscreen printing. I loved it at the time, and it's always, I think, a brilliant medium of art. There are several other artists, I guess, who I've admired over time. Photographers like Andre Kietes and Dwayne Michaels and Philip Lorca de Courcia. Jeff Wall I was a great fan of. I am a great fan of Jeff Wall's work, and I did at a certain point used to create stage photography with actors and settings, and that was quite I think that was influenced by Jeff Wall's work. So, and Michael Craig Martin, I find his work quite, I guess that's the sort of technology side, perhaps, the objects that he presents in his paintings, and the colours, of course, probably have influenced me. That sort of work, with the blocks of colour, which I use, or I have used fairly frequently in my work.
So it sounds like you have quite a lot of influences, and I find it interesting too that music keeps popping up as well.
Yes.
Whether you're doing kind of posters or you started off early on,
yes,
in music yourself. So it kind of weaves itself back into your life periodically, doesn't it?
I think so. And I think there was always that connection with visual art when I was doing the music. We were doing posters. That was part of it. So I'm very happy to have been asked once again to produce an art piece for the cover of an album, and that's a great honour.
Yeah, I mean, I find it pretty amazing myself, and I think in today's world, you think, oh, we've lost the appreciation of artwork for albums and things, but I think there's still a market or an appreciation for that as well. So it's great that you've been asked to do another kind of cover for an album. So that I find that really cool, personally.
Thanks, Heather. Thank you. Thanks.
One thing that I guess I'm mindful of, technology moves on, and increasingly technology changes. And I'm mindful at the moment that AI is very much here, and we're increasingly talking about it. I think AI has been around for a while now, but it's becoming more and more in the fore. What are your thoughts on AI and its place? And is it something that you'd ever consider using to produce or to create your artwork or construct your artwork?
That's very, very good direction we're going in here. Thank you, Heather. Because I often think, I think of my work as a collaboration with the machine. It's programs, it's other people's work. True, they've actually produced the programs that I'm using to produce my work. So it's a collaborative thing. We often, I think the terminology, the machine or the beast or whatever we like to call it is sort of covers a whole variety of things. And I think there's a lot of people involved. So it is a human thing. But now we're moving into the territory where it's a little bit more machine driven than human driven. And I think that's very interesting territory. And currently I'm in preparation stages for an exhibition in November 13th to the 30th of November at APT Gallery in Deptford. And the show's entitled Translucent Intersections. And it's a group of 8 of us are putting the show together, 8 artists using a variety of media. And one of the overriding aspects to the show is that we're engaging AI to assist us with the curatorial process. We've already explored different avenues of this in our understanding of how our work fits together. So the translucent intersections is about intersecting of the work of different artists. So we don't have a theme as such. The project doesn't, the exhibition isn't sort of theme driven. It's artist driven, and the work is what the individuals taking part would like to present. But we're looking for the commonality, the connections, and the translucent intersections of those that perhaps aren't obvious. They're not they're maybe a bit opaque. You can see if you work hard or if you look in a different way, you might find those intersections. But that's the idea, is there's more than just what we see. There are other things that bring the works together. And we decided to include the AI assistant, our assistant in curating the exhibition. And it's more of a project, I suppose. We're spending time developing our curatorial approach, and also we're discussing along the way. We hope to do a regular blog over the several months, in the next few months, when we're bringing the show together. And after the show's started, we'll be continuing with the blog. But we'd like to engage with people who visit about the use of AI in this particular way. And a lot of artists, and myself included, use AI and particular ChatGPT or another form of that for assisting us in talking about our work, in interpreting things that were associated with our work. And major museums and galleries, I understand, use AI in developing exhibitions from their collections. But in terms of small groups of artists, I'm not aware of using AI in this way, but it could quite easily be happening. But our intention is not only to use it, but to document it and to make it known and to make it a talking point. I think for other artists, it'll be, I hope it's a great talking and discussion point when they visit the exhibition and sort of see because we will keep that aspect of it, that process will be quite live in terms of discussion and presenting. I mean, we hope to include a conversation corner, as they call it, where visitors are able to contribute to our show as well.
And where do you think that exhibition will take you? Because it seems quite, in some ways, I presume there's going to be a bit of a static bit, of the artwork itself, but it sounds like you're kind of prompting those conversations. You're using it, AI, it has an AI to help you curate it, and to get those discussions with people who visit. So where would you like to see that exhibition go? Are there kind of outputs from it you think actually that could influence something in the future?
I think there'll be a lot to discuss during this period of the project. Heather, I think there's quite a few points that people are bringing up in the group already. And, of course, there's one particular area I think it gets touched on at a government level every now and then, that of intellectual property. And where does intellectual property sit within the AI, projected use of AI, etc.? So I think there's quite a bit to discuss there, which will be a great opportunity for us, the 8 of us, to sort of talk about our impressions of where things are going with AI, and I think that's one aspect that will certainly be a result of the show. But in terms of the future, well, I'm quite keen, and one of the things with digital art is it's a giant medium, if you like, and in line with that medium, there's a lot of distractions. There's so many things that pop up, that appear, that you hear about, that are available, that you think, oh, I should incorporate that. Oh, I might just try that, or I'll have a go at that, which is fascinating and fun. But at the same time, you do have to kind of retain your focus on what it is that you're doing. And I think with the AI, I would be keen to use it to sort of support me in what I'm doing. I don't want to get too distracted by it, because there'd be a lot to do, and you could sort of set off on a different path if you incorporate AI in your actual work. I mean, I do to some extent use the machine programs that are available to currently that assist me with my work. I would imagine that things in the AI area will develop that I will use, and I'd like to sort of keep my hand in there, just keep an eye on it, and only use things that I think are really necessary in my work, and not get too carried away with all of the opportunity to explore and try things out.
And I'm really looking forward to seeing your future work and how you kind of incorporate, I don't want to say incorporate, but how AI can assist you, as you say.
Yes, yeah. Assist is good, I think.
Yeah. Because I think sometimes there's a sense of it's taking over the world and we're all going to lose our jobs. But yeah. I don't know if, you will never know, but, I think at this stage it's not going to. So, and I should say, actually, the exhibition you're talking about is November 2025, and it's in Deptford, South London, for those who are London-based.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I do have an international reach, so I do try to
yes.
be clear. Now it comes to my final question of what's next. Where do you think, or where do you see yourself going with your art?
Well, I'm particularly engaged with the 3D side of things at the moment. I the idea of feeding an image or whatever I've captured into the digital sphere and having it kind of manipulated in code, etc., and then outputting that collaboration into the physical space once more, so that you're not only viewing it, but you're actually feeling it. The machines contributed to this work of art, and that's obvious. In the work that I do, it's clear that there's machinery involved and there's coding involved, and I like that idea of that collaboration, I suppose. I probably would. I mean, a lot of the 3D work I do is fairly small. I am limited by the equipment that I have. That doesn't mean to say I'm limited by the intention I have for scaling the work. And I would really like to produce some fairly large scale work in the future, in the next 12 months or so. I'd like to move into that area, where I'm actually producing fairly large scale work. And I have, several ideas and for sort of developing new projects in that area.
It sounds fascinating, and quite frankly, I'm again looking forward to your outputs and what you're producing.
Thanks, Heather.
I have seen a number of your work, and it's quite diverse. And I find it amazing, and it does challenge kind of your perception, of what's real, what's not, what's machine, what's nature. And I just like that interplay with the two, and in that creativity, and then I don't know if playfulness is the right word, but it's that kind of, the two of them, and where does one stop and the other begin?
Yeah.
Which I find really quite fascinating. But I'd like to thank you, Geoff. It's been really interesting speaking with you and about your journey and about your artwork and your processes. I'd like to thank you, and good luck with your exhibition in November.
Thank you very much, Heather, and thanks for inviting me. I enjoy the Artist's Tale podcasts, and I look forward to hearing more of them. And thanks for inviting me again.
Well, thank you, and thanks for such wonderful words about the podcast. I really enjoy speaking to the guests, so I'm glad other people enjoyed as well. So thank you. Thanks for tuning into my conversation with Geoff. I hope his insights into digital media and photography gave you a fresh lens through which to view the world. If you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out Geoff's website and social media presence, all linked in the show notes. And if you're enjoying Artist Tales, Help us keep the momentum going by sharing the podcast with your friends and fellow creatives. In the next episode, I'll be speaking with James Cook, a UK-based artist who creates astonishingly detailed portraits, cityscapes, and architectural wonders using nothing but a typewriter. His work transforms a vintage machine into a tool of modern expression, exploring perspective, hidden messages, and the beauty of constraint.